everyone. I want to welcome you to our December 8th meeting tonight. If you would all like to stand, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for 10 seconds of silence. You may be seated. As we welcome you in person at this virtual Indian Rocks Beach City Commission meeting, which is convening pursuant to the executive orders issued by the Office of Governor Ron DeSantis, allowing local government bodies to conduct meetings of their governing boards without having a quorum of its members present physically or at any specific location, and utilizing communication media technology such as telephonic or video conferencing as provided by Section 120.54 5B2 Florida statute. At this time, I'm going to have Matt introduce himself and begin our meeting, and then once you have finished, Matt, we'll do the roll call.
Good afternoon. I'm going to ask that when the City Clerk, Deanna Riley, calling of each member of the Indian Rocks Beach Commission, that you individually confirm that you're here, are able to hear us, and can respond. Please note that everyone but the Commission chambers is currently on mute. I could request that you're unmuted via the internet. However, I will not be able to unmute you myself, so you will have to do that.
Deanna?
Mayor Cookie Kennedy,
Here.
Vice Mayor Phil Hanna,
Here.
Commissioner Diane Flack, who is appearing virtually today,
Here.
Commissioner Edward Hoofnagel,
Here.
Commissioner Joe McCall.
Here.
The members of the City Commission are here and have a quorum.
Matt?
I'll then ask for each of the virtual folks that are attending remotely that when you wish to speak, that you use either the chat function or you raise your hand by using the three dots in the bottom of the participants menu. You should be able to hit raise hand. I will see a blue icon and then I can address you.
With that, we're going to go to our presentations tonight, and our first presentation will be from my good friend Whit Blanton, who is the Executive Director of Ford Pinellas. And if you want to come forward, Whit's going to tell you a little bit about the legislative agenda coming up.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hi.
Is it okay if I lose
Yes,
this
sir.
for the presentation part? Well, every year I go around to as many local governments that will have me in Pinellas County to give them an update on our focus for the coming year. And it's timely now that we talk a little bit about legislative earmarks and priorities. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. But first, I just want to start with a reminder about our role as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Pinellas County. One of our main jobs is to bring state and federal funds for transportation projects into the community for projects that are needed. And so this year we issued our first ever call for projects for our major transportation project grant programs. And we had a staggered list of when those applications were due. The little graphic on the screen shows that we had that call for project in July, and then different programs were due through December 11th. The committee is in the process of reviewing those applications, and we will be bringing recommendations to the board in March of 2021. Next slide. And I'm just going to quickly touch on some of these programs. We adopted our Advantage Pinellas Long Range Plan in 2019 that looks out to 2045 for the community. And it's really focused on several things: improving traffic flow and congestion, creating safer streets in Pinellas County, and enhancing transit connections, all kind of wrapped around our land use goals of guiding growth to the right places and in the right scale and in the right character, and then preserving those areas that we don't want to see a lot of change happen or protecting the character of the environment in a given area. And providing housing that's affordable. That's a big challenge we have in our county, preserving employment and industrial land uses for high-wage jobs. So it all works together in our framework. Next slide, please. So the first major project area of funding is our multimodal projects priority list. And this is the basis for the Florida Department of Transportation's 5-year work program in an urban area like ours. These are larger projects. You can see the minimum size of a project is about $350,000. But some of the projects on this list are over $1 million, or over $100 million in fact. And we've limited to only 3 applications per local government. Several years ago, one of our larger cities submitted about 10. And we want to make sure they're geographically balanced. This considers all modes, and they're evaluated against the criteria that support Florida Pinellas goals. And the next slide shows those: improving safety, mobility, fostering economic growth, enhancing equity, protecting the environment, increasing the resilience of our vulnerable coastline. The next program is our Transportation Alternatives Program, or TA. This is a federal program where we have money directly from the federal government for eligible projects that include bicycle safety, pedestrian, and non-auto transportation projects. This is really about infrastructure, not operations, and there are prerequisites on this program that we have to have local commitment, which makes sense, 100% of the right-of-way or the easement for the right-of-way, and then this is a tough one for smaller communities, but the Florida Department of Transportation requires that if these funds are passed through, you have to be local agency certified or LAP certified, and that only really applies to some of our larger agencies, but the county has been good about working in partnership with some of our local governments, such as Indian Rocks Beach, if you don't have that certification, and I don't believe you do. The next major program is our Complete Streets program. This is the 5th year of this program, and it really ties land use and transportation together to look at streets that need a makeover to support redevelopment goals in the community. Next slide. And over the almost 5 years we've had this program, we've awarded $4 million in construction projects and about $500,000 in concept planning. Those are the 2 main categories. The concept planning comes out of our planning dollars, and that needs to be spent within a year. The construction dollars go into the 5-year work program and are added to the new 5th year of that work program. Similar criteria as the Transportation Alternatives Program, but a stronger land use connection and a linkage to redevelopment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about legislative earmarks and why they can pose problems. Next slide, please. Legislative earmarks have been popular in a lot of local governments throughout Florida because they circumvent sometimes the difficult process of getting your project funded, especially for transportation that has to go through reviews and get on a long list and work its way to the top. A lot of communities over the years have used legislative earmarks to reach out to a legislator and to get something added to the budget and then approved by the governor. The problem we have with earmarks is that they don't grow the funding pie. It's not new money, so it comes out of the Transportation Trust Fund, and even if you try to bring it out of the general fund, once it goes into the legislative committee process, it's really hard to change that direction, and it's considered a transportation project. What we've seen happen is that earmarked local projects force other priority projects out of the queue that have been working their way steadily to the top. And then if the governor vetoes the earmarked project, that money is gone from the budget, so it doesn't come back. It doesn't get reallocated. It's just lowering the budget. The Department of Transportation is prohibited from working on that project if it's been vetoed. So let's say, for example, they're in the midst of design and you get money for right-of-way acquisition, and the governor vetoes the money for right-of-way acquisition. DOT stops work on the design for a year, so it can set you back on your project. And then earmark can only be for one phase of a project, so you can't say I need an earmark for design and construction. And we had an issue in Clearwater not long ago when I first got here, where PSTA asked for an earmark, was granted a $1 million earmark to design a busway over the Memorial Causeway Bridge, and Clearwater wasn't happy with the design. What we really needed were planning dollars to kind of work out those issues, and that money ended up going nowhere. So that was, to me, that was a waste of money. Next slide, please. So in last year's budget, we had a goodwill earmark for our Regional Transit Authority, and that was $1 million they didn't ask for, but a legislator thought they needed it. And that ended up coming out of PSTA's budget for their downtown Park Street terminal in Clearwater. But we had another earmark in Hillsborough County that eliminated 5 other safety projects that DOT had planned to fund. So there are unintended consequences. Go ahead, next slide, please. So what we ask you to do is, if you're thinking about earmark, and this is my message to all the local governments, is reach out to us and we can work with you on finding possibly other forms of funding. The Safe Routes to Schools program is not one we control, but we can have influence. The Highway Safety Improvement Program is another one that we can influence the Department of Transportation on that by giving them data and analysis to support that. So just work with us and we can help the earmark problem maybe go away. Next slide, please. The challenge with earmarks is that it really means getting the language right and knowing what you're looking for and connecting the dots. And sometimes we can identify an even better funding source than what your earmark might accomplish. Next slide, please. So this comes back to legislative priorities, and I'll just go into that. So our board has not yet adopted these. These will be presented in January for approval, but they've been recommended by our legislative committee. And Mayor, you serve on that. I'm going to go through each of these pretty quickly, so I won't dwell on this slide. Let's go to the first one. Protecting trust funds. And we've developed these priorities from a lot of outreach with our partners across the county and the state. And we really are focusing on protecting those trust funds that are money allocated for specific purposes. The Sadowski Affordable Housing Program and the Transportation Trust Fund are routinely, in lean budget years, swept by the legislature and taken from those purposes into the general fund. And when that happens, that takes down the opportunity to do affordable housing, which is a real challenge in our county, and to do transportation projects. The next one is supporting flexible and sustained transportation funding. I won't read all this, but the short of it is an urban area like Pinellas County needs a little more flexibility in how we use the Transportation Trust Fund dollars, because a lot of them are earmarked for projects that only add capacity to the highway system or that are limited to certain roadways, such as on the strategic intermodal system. And we only have 3 roads on that system, I-275, US 19, or the new Gateway Expressway. And that leaves the balance of our state roads for a relatively small share of funding. And most of the funding for those have to show a capacity improvement, not a safety or another accessibility improvement. And we're just not adding that many lanes to our roadways. So when we looked at our long-range plan, we found that we had $400 million that was projected to come to Pinellas County that we could not spend. We could not find projects for over the next 25 years because of the inflexibility in that program. And that's just one example. There are a lot of other examples, and we just adopted a position statement for transit funding that asks for increased flexibility, because that is one of the more constrained sources of funding. Next slide, please. The top one is supporting safety for all users of our transportation network, and this is really touching 2 things. One is texting while driving. We did get some legislation passed last year, but it's pretty limited and could go a little bit further. The other one is the rectangular rapid flashing beacons that you have up and down Gulf Boulevard and throughout Pinellas County. We had a hostile piece of legislation that I'll cover in a moment that threatened to remove all of those. And that's a local safety decision, and we don't think that should be dictated by Tallahassee. Similarly, maintaining the MPO authority, that's a lot of words there just to say that the federal government set up the framework for agencies like ours, and we get to decide at the local level who serves on that board based on population, based on the county demographics, and we don't think that ought to be dictated by Tallahassee either. They have threatened over the years to merge our MPO with Pasco and Hillsborough to create a regional MPO. And while there may be some merits to that, that ought to be a local decision rather than something that Tallahassee dictates to us. Next slide, please. And I've been told that I probably ought to change the words home rule because that makes the legislators go crazy in Tallahassee. It's kind of a trigger word, but maybe supporting local choices for local communities or something like that. But the idea, whether it's vacation rentals or those rectangular rapid flashing beacons or how we structure our MPO, is that Tallahassee likes to tell local governments what they can and can't do. sometimes because of one bad case in one city out of 400 across the state, and they ignore all the good things that are happening, but then they pass a blanket piece of legislation that affects everybody. So we really want to send that message that local communities know what's best for them. They operate within the law by and large, and I don't think there's any real bad cases of malfeasance, so let's not legislate by your hip pocket of identifying one bad apple and saying everybody else gets thrown out too.
Amen.
You say it a lot better than I do. You get a lot more passion in you about those issues. Supporting state and federal assistance with addressing the effects of COVID-19. This covers a lot of things, but most notably at the federal level is the CARES Act. That program funding is running out. Congress is talking about some renewals, but also it's very cumbersome to get through that process and get the funding. So folks who are hoping to get the money by December needed to really apply back in October. And so we also recognize that meetings like this that can be held virtually in the time of an emergency, it would be nice to have some additional flexibility to have virtual meetings held under different circumstances, because the participation levels we've seen has been fantastic. So we do have an ask for the legislature to consider some modest amendments to the Sunshine Law that would give some of our advisory committees, for instance, or maybe even our governing board, say 90 days after an emergency ends, because the governor has extended the state of emergency, allowing virtual meetings, for instance, like at 6 p.m. on a Friday, when we've already paid for advertisement. So there are some ways that we can improve that process. And then finally, our last point is Speaker Sprowls has made an issue of resilience and setting up a state funding program to assist with grants. We think that's a great idea. Resilience is a huge issue in our region, and we just want to see that effort go forward. Florida has been really kind of lagging on the resilience front over the last 8 years, really. I just want to dwell a little bit on the legislative battle we had last year that we were successful in overcoming, but there were two pieces of legislation, one in the House that passed the full chamber, and one in the Senate that made it to its last committee stop, that would have forced us to assess every one of those 400 rapid flashing beacons, rapid, not rabid, across Pinellas County, and look at either removing them or turning them into red flashing beacons, because red means stop. While that may be intuitive, these are governed by the Federal Highway Administration, and there's a different device for making them red. And if you drive on Park Boulevard going towards Pinellas Park, those devices have just been installed, and they force traffic to come to a complete stop until the time cycle ends, and then they can go. These are a nice balance, because they're flashing when you're in the crosswalk. Cars are required legally to stop, so all it does is reinforce the law that says you have to stop for a pedestrian in the crosswalk, and then you can proceed once that pedestrian is out of your way, so there's less delay. These are also a lot cheaper to install, and they're only really recommended for roads that are 35 miles an hour or lower, or 4 lanes or fewer. And the other devices are better for Park Boulevard, your 6-lane and 45 mile an hour roads. And these are really effective too. Next slide, please. So things we're monitoring in 2021, you all can read this list as well as I, but I just want to highlight a couple things. The City of St. Pete has looked at the potential broadening of the Penny for Pinellas for affordable housing funding. There's a statutory limitation on that it can only be used for land acquisition and clearing the land, not to make buildings go vertical. So St. Pete is looking for support to broaden that. I don't know that they've got it. They do have sponsors. Senator Hooper and Representative Latvala are willing to work with us on this, but they want to see broader countywide support. And then the next major issue I want to bring to your attention is budget restrictions due to COVID-19. We are seeing a $1 billion cut in our transportation funding in District 7 in this current fiscal year. And unfortunately what that means is some of our high priority projects put off for a long, long time. The I-275 improvements that are sorely needed for safety and mobility to link the Howard Franklin Bridge to downtown St. Petersburg has been pushed from 2025 to 2031. That has enormous regional ramifications, because now you're going to have the Howard Franklin Bridge complete, and you're going to have 6 lanes going into 3 at the West Shore Interchange, because the West Shore Interchange has been deferred by 2 years. And that was the #1 project in the region, that we all came together, Hillsborough, Pasco, Pinellas, local governments across the region, and that funding was awarded by the governor last year. But the sales tax and the gas tax revenues are down big time, and all the state of Florida can do is deliver a balanced budget. So there are some things that could affect that. If the legislature sweeps some of those funds this year to balance the budget, we'll be in for a worse situation. If Congress helps out with state and local relief for transportation, we'll be in a better situation. If the toll roads that are down through the rural areas are unfunded by the legislature, then that might help as well. And I forgot to mention, there's a bunch of US 19 projects north of Clearwater that are also being taken out of the work program. So we've had some setbacks on US 19 as well. I will say that District 7 has been very good about funding our local priorities with the discretion that they have at the district level. But Tallahassee is responsible for these cuts, and I think it upsets our secretary here in District 7, Secretary Gwynn, as much as it does me. But I do want to be real with you that transportation funding is going to be a challenge for the next 5 to 6 years, because they're saying it'll take 5 to 6 years before we're coming back to where we should be with the work program due to COVID. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions you might have and see if there's anything I can do to be of service.
Does anyone have a question for Whit? Diane Flagg, I know you're out there. Do you have any questions for Whit Blanton?
No, ma'am, nothing.
Okay. Whit, thank you for coming. You didn't mention about our new waterborne transportation. How come?
Well, that wasn't really on my topic to talk about, but I'm really happy that we've had our first meeting and we're going to have our second meeting on December 18th.
Cool.
And it looks like you've got Congressman Christ, 95% going to be there. And we are going to be looking at ways to expand and sustain our waterborne network of ferries and water taxis. Right now it serves Clearwater and Dunedin, and we'd like to see the whole intercoastal benefit from that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you for letting me go first.
Okay, thank you.
Y'all have a good meeting.
Okay, with that, David Ardman, who is our fire commissioner with Pinellas Suncoast Fire and Rescue, he has a report on file. Is David on Zoom tonight, just asking?
No, he's not really.
He's not on, okay. He wanted me to mention that a lovely Indian Rocks Beach resident dropped off a check at my shop for $1,000 for the fire department, and we presented it to the fire department, and they are going to use the money, they told us, for a piece of apparatus for each one of the firemen. And I thought that was pretty cool. So thanking our resident that participated, and they sent her a lovely note. She stopped in today, and I appreciate the fact that she asked me to present it to them. So I wanted to mention that. And with that, we will now go to public comment. We have 3-minute limit per speaker. Any member of the audience may come forward, give his or her name, address, and state any comment or concern that she or he may have regarding any matter over which the City Commission has control, excluding any agenda items that are on for tonight. All statements made to the City Commission shall be made to the City Commission as a whole, not directed to any City Commission member, and no personal or slanderous remarks shall be permitted. No speaker shall be interrupted, and no debate shall take place between the speakers and the City Commission. And with that, hi Nancy.
How are
You are our first speaker tonight.
Hi, Nancy Obarski, 708 Beach Trail, number B, Indian Rocks. The single most important issue facing Indian Rocks Beach right now is getting beach renourishment for 2024. The Army Corps of Engineers is requiring 100% of 461 beachfront owners to give up rights to the land that we own beyond our seawall out to the erosion control line. For me, that's about 25 feet. Less than half have signed. It's 47.5% as of this morning, to be precise, and that's after multiple requests. New signatures at a virtual standstill, only 4 more have signed over the last 3 months, and that's not just Indian Rocks, that's from Sand Key all the way down to Reddington. At last week's meeting of the beach community mayors, where Mayor Kennedy was present, Pinellas County announced that they'd be sending out yet another mailing in hopes of getting more signatures. I just can't imagine why anyone in their right mind would spend more taxpayer money on paper, ink, and postage when they have to get from 47.5% to 100% before we get any sand. And the bigger question for you as a commission is, how will you justify not trying to stop the county from fleecing more of our beachfront owners out of their property rights at this juncture, knowing full well, right now as we stand here, there is zero chance that we're going to get 100% of those signatures. And anyone that signs after tonight or after now is giving up rights for absolutely not one grain of sand. Unfortunately, I think Charlie Crist's argument in his recent letter pleading our case to the Army Corps wasn't really that helpful. He hung his hat on the argument that the Corps shouldn't be asking us for easements for areas that they're not going to put any sand in 2024. Unfortunately, those of us that have been involved in this issue pretty heavily since 2017 know that the Army Corps has already debunked that. They don't care about rights for 2024. They're more concerned about a catastrophic event. So actually the argument he used kind of fell flat, and I think he missed a golden opportunity, probably because he didn't have the right information to present a more compelling argument to the Corps. I have 6 copies of an article I'm going to leave called "The Army Corps of Engineers Has Become a Rogue Agency." And I'm hoping that when you read this, you'll see that it's not the beachfront owners that are the bad guys here. And we quite honestly have been portrayed that way. It seems the Corps spends more time fighting lawsuits and with all their overreach to overreach than they do building bridges these days. Lately, I've recently seen an inkling, especially at the county level, for some pushback finally against the Army Corps, which is encouraging. But I fear this change of focus may be too late now that the Army Corps woke up last week and decided that the deadline is no longer spring of 2021, it's the end of this year in a few weeks. So we all want the same thing, sand, but it's time to acknowledge that getting more signatures isn't the means to the end. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to come up at this time? Hi, Dr. Magby.
I may have, oops, sorry about that.
Sure.
This one, is it one side?
Yep, here.
Okay, yes. Sure. That was fine, there is a little. Thank you. Good evening. Dr. Magdi Abu Hamid, 101 Rush. I'm here tonight to talk to you about the IRB pickleball courts and the playing time that we currently have. Since last March, and due to COVID, following the shutdown of all the pickleball indoor facilities around us, the number of pickleball players that really start descending on our outdoor, lovely outdoor courts increased a lot. It became very difficult for IRB residents like myself, my wife, and others who also are the taxpayers here to really have some quality playing time. As you know, pickleball is one of the most growing sports among seniors and also young players as well. So the problem is really getting even worse these days with the arrival of snowbirds. We definitely welcome them, many of them are our friends, but they add a burden on the courts. If you drive by the courts in the morning, especially in the morning, you will always see 20 to 30 players sitting around waiting for playing time. During COVID, it's a problem, of course, because you can't maintain social distance. But other than that, there is also the waiting time. You could be waiting for 40 to 50 minutes to play a game of 5 minutes. That was not the case last year and the year before. So we need to find a solution. I can offer you multiple options. Some people would like to limit the court to be used by IRB residents only, or IRB residents and a couple of guests. Another option that I like to offer to you is to assign some dedicated time only on Monday and Thursday, only 2 days a week. Assign some dedicated time between 4 to 6 p.m. in winter and 5 to 7 p.m. in summer, so a smaller group of IRB women and men can enjoy this game without much interruption from outside players. A third option could be to look at increasing the number of the dedicated pickleball courts. We have 2 dedicated pickleball courts and we have 2 courts on the tennis courts, lined with tennis courts. However, if you look around, you will see people only want to play on the dedicated courts. They don't want to be chasing balls. If you play on the open tennis courts, you have to chase balls a lot. So I'm asking the city to consider to increase the number of dedicated pickleball courts by taking one of the 2 tennis courts. We can easily and with minimum cost switch them to 3 pickleball courts side by side, separate them by a little fence. And I can be more than happy to talk to you more about it and to our city manager about it at definitely a later time. Some people will say that will increase the number of players attracted to our courts. Yes, it will. But if you have 5 courts, the turnaround of games will be very quick. You will have more people playing and less waiting time for each one to play a game. This is the case if you go up north to Norwood and Clearwater. They have 6 courts and they have over 50 players. But you don't feel that you are waiting too long because people go in and out and turn over the courts very quickly. We really need the city corporation and willingness to work with us before turning this fun sports into a bigger problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manager. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward? Hi, Don.
Okay. Don House, 2104 Beach Trail. So I too want to talk about the beach easements. First off, I want to thank Greg for forwarding the copy of the letter that Chris wrote to the in regard to the easements. The most important phrase that I found in there was, he said, unfortunately, there was an understandable skepticism from property owners. And I think that is probably the biggest insight in this whole thing. There is a lot of skepticism from those of us that live on the beach, and it needs to be addressed. I haven't seen a whole lot of addressing to the homeowners. I mean, okay, we had the last conference that we had. We got to listen to 5 or 6 people expound deeply on with all their stuff about what was going on. But nobody asked us what we think. We had 2 minutes each to say something, and it's not a round table where people can talk about what's going on. You know, these are things that we live on the beach, we know what's going on, and we're very much concerned about it. So, Cookie and I had I thought, a productive conversation about a month ago, where, you know, but the thing that failed in that conversation, or after that conversation, was that she had stated that some of the things in there were not right. I don't know, you know. I know that there was a couple of things in there that I didn't personally agree with, but they were not legal issues. They were thoughts about living on the beach. If there are legal issues in the letter that was put out by a couple of attorneys that came to all of us that live on the beach, I would like to know what there are. I saw a quote from someone that worked at the county that said the same thing, that somebody was putting out negative, a derogatory letter about it. well, what's negative? I mean, negative is a different point of view. If it's legally wrong, fine. I mean, but don't do the Donald Trump thing and just say it's a bunch of crap and don't say what the crap is, okay? Answer what's wrong. Tell us what's wrong and what's in that letter. Tell us why we should do what we need to do, and then listen to us, and we can maybe solve this. But I don't know. It's gotten so far now that nobody wants to trust anybody. And like when Cookie said before, says no one's going to come to the table. I think that's the saddest thing about this. People have to come to the table, have to solve this. I mean, and if it's not going to be pursued, where the people that actually live on the beach, that actually have to sign these easements, if they're not included besides 2 minutes every month, it ain't going nowhere, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time? If not, we will close for public comment.
Could you need to check and see if there's anybody?
Is, Matt, could you check anyone who might be calling in?
Madam Mayor, I do have a speaker under one of the upcoming items on the agenda. I think it's item number 7. At this time, I see no participation. I just want to remind those that are joined that the 8 individuals that are online right now, you can either engage for speaking by using the chat option or using the up arrow next to the participants and using the raise hand feature. At this time, Madam Mayor, I see no participation.
Thank you, Matt. At this time, would our city attorney, Randy Mora, do you have a report for us?
No report, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. How about our city manager, Greg Mims?
Good evening. I just have a few quick things. At our last city commission meeting, we had a quite lengthy discussion about parking and where people should park and not park. And one of the things that came up is particularly an item that Diane Flagg brought up was IRB resident spaces. And prior to the last meeting, we have reserved IRB spaces at the Nature Preserve, particularly in front of the dog park. We have reserved spaces at Keating Clare Park down in the renovated park where the boat docks are, and then obviously we have spaces at all the IRB beach accesses. And part of the, and we talked about this at work session, and we talked about the last couple of meetings, but we actually, after the 2014 meeting, added additional IRB spaces at each of the beach accesses. But I took to heart a lot of the comments and about resident spaces and where they are, and as a result of that, I instructed staff to add, we added dedicated parking spaces, 2 at Cole Park, 2 at Brown Park, and 2 at the 10th Avenue Park. And the fact of the matter is, 99% of the year you can come to any of those parks and find a space, but there are some times, particularly through this COVID event, where it's been a little tough. So now, by the addition of those spaces to those 3 different parks, we have at least a couple of spaces in every city park where residents can try to get in a good spot. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. And that brings, and we'll talk about this more later tonight, that brings the grand total of resident spaces with all the beach accesses in the parks to 73. So we talk later about resident decals, keep that number in mind. One of the things that we did was part of the capital budget is that we installed solar panels on City Hall and the museum. Those are activated and working now. In fact, the next thing we'll do is in the museum and the lobby of City Hall, there'll be like a computer screen there where in real time you can walk up and the public can see what it's generating and what it's saving us and that kind of thing. But generally, the City Hall installation over a period of time will save us about 47% in energy cost and a reduction of 1,660 tons of CO2. The museum installation will result in the savings of about 87% and a reduction of about 300 tons of CO2. So that project's complete and it's up and running. I want to thank the staff for the work that goes into the IRD Street Parade. My only regret about that with the COVID world that we're living in right now, I saw a lot of little faces that were staring at me as the city manager, particularly as a father and a grandfather that were waiting with their bags for candy. And unlike other cities that decided not to have a parade at all, we made the decision not to throw. So I would invite the public back next year, and we'll double up. The boat parade is looking like it's going to be pretty large this year. There again, due to COVID, there's some traditionally large boat parades that are not going to have parades, so we're going to be the beneficiary of, I think, some extra boats. So that's scheduled for December 19th. And the last, because we do have a pretty lengthy agenda, I just want to say on behalf of all the employees with the city, to the commission and the public, that wish y'all a Merry Christmas. This has been a tough year. I can I'm looking for the 2021 number to roll in, and hopefully we'll have a better year. But I want to, and I say this particularly around budget time, and I think that more than ever it's important to remember this. We live in a really special place, and I think most of us realize that. And as your manager, and I've been here now for about 7.5 years, whether it's this group of commissioners or the different commissioners we've had on, we'll have disagreements about things and have discussions about what to do, how to do, when to do things. But I, as your manager, I'm appreciative the entire time I've been here, particularly with the group that you have now, that although we may disagree, it's cordial, as one of the previous speakers just mentioned. That's one of the things that's lacking in our country now, is that people can't sit down and figure it out. And that's one thing that we have here. And I think we probably would agree, the stories I've told, they told many years ago, that was not the situation where there were meetings that went to midnight and a lot of different things went on. You had a rotating door of city managers. And I just want to say, on behalf of myself, that I appreciate that, because we get a lot of good things done here. And I'm always open to ideas, suggestions, input. I don't have all the answers, don't pretend to have them. And although I've been in this business for a long time, I've still come to work motivated, come to work wanting to hear input from the commission, the public. And we'll just continue to do really cool things here and make this place as great as we can make it. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Does anyone have any questions for the city manager at this time? Pretty good. Diane, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to the city commission. Commissioner McCall, do you have any reports tonight?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Huffnagel, do you have any reports?
With respect to the beach sand, I think we'll never get agreement on the easements, and I think those of you who are grappling with that should realize that the Army Corps of Engineers does not want to encourage development on seaside areas, and if you find their actions to be overwhelming and in some ways discouraging, I think it's by design and strategy. I don't think it's coincidental. And it's an attempt by the planning agencies at the national level to discourage seaside development, and we are facing the brunt of that. And so I don't think that letters to the Army Corps of Engineers are going to solve that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Vice Mayor Hannah?
Echo what Greg said, thank the city for assisting in putting on the street parade. It was really well attended. We had a lot of fun. And I also echo that it's been nice being on a commission for the 12 years that we have gotten along, and we're all here because no one has an agenda except one, and that's the city. And I think that's the important thing. That's why we operate as efficiently as we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Very nice comments from everyone. Just a couple things. Boat parade was great. I'd like to thank the staff and all of our residents. We've had a year. I'll just leave it at that. And I want to thank A2K and the homeowners for stepping up to the plate at the beginning of COVID and helping us with a project to help some of our citizens that had underlying conditions, and making sure that we could make sure that they had groceries, or if they needed medicine or incidentals. They helped me with that project. I am forever grateful, and I know that it was about, I believe it was almost 30 people that they helped during the worst part, and I believe they're still helping. And I also wanted to bring up, Ed, could you mention a little bit about the A2K, the fundraiser that they're doing at the moment?
Oh, the challenge,
The challenge.
The virtual challenge. So since we couldn't have an Oktoberfest, there was a desire to engage folks in a way of being active and raising money. And there's, through the 10th of December, the virtual challenge. It's based on setting personal goals electronically and publishing those, and then competing with against those goals to demonstrate some achievement, whether it's running or walking or doing other kinds of activities that can be measured. It's been a nice fundraiser. It's gotten people engaged in a much different way, and we're grateful to the new leadership at A2K for encouraging and developing it.
Thank you for that. How about the homeowners? Is there anything, Joe, from the homeowners for the rest of the year or beginning for next?
No, the homeowners just kind of planning stage to see what April brings us. Obviously, Beach Fest is the largest fundraiser HOA has, so we'll see how that plays out going into next year.
On November 29th was the year anniversary of my beloved mayor, Bob DiNicola, who served the longest in this community, 12 years. And we had a tree planting for him at the Nature Preserve, where he was very instrumental in helping the city acquire that property with just his family. And so if you have a chance to go over, the tree is in the center near the bathrooms, and there is it'll be a plaque that the family purchased, and we will have that. So it was beautiful, and I do thank the city and the staff for going to great lengths to do that. He was my mentor, and many people felt very strongly about him, and I loved him, and I think it was a very small something to do for a man who had such a big involvement in this community. Just to piggyback a little bit about the beach renourishment, and we are going to continue to look at avenues. I believe that the beginning of having a conversation with Congressman Christ was an opening of a door. I don't believe it was a lost opportunity. I believe that we will be engaged further with them, and I'm trying to find positive in a situation that seems to have a lot of negatives at this time. And we mentioned in the newspaper the last time that, I don't take no very well, and we will continue to try to turn every stone as best we can, and to try to get beach renourishment to continue on our beaches in Indian Rocks Beach, and not just us in Indian Shores. And one of the interesting things is Clearwater and one of the Bel Airs, I believe it's Bel Air Beach, they have gotten all their signatures, and I believe the Reddingtons have. So we're going to look at as many avenues. We have enlisted with us the head, Kelly Levy, who is the head of environmental, she's the director at Pinellas County, and so a lot of the information, since she's been involved with this project from the beginning, and also John Bishop, who has also been involved there. They've been a part of the conversations that we have begun at different levels. So I'm just appreciative for them, and we'll just keep working as best we can with that. And again, Merry Christmas to everyone, and we look forward to a brighter year, and we do have a lot to be thankful for in Indian Rocks Beach, I believe. With that, yes?
Quick mention, I apologize.
No, you're
We
fine.
got there. One thing I did remember, Kathy Mack, as we all know her, over at Century 21, pretty much across the park there, will be having her toy drive again this year. So please kind of be on the watch for that. We're still, she's still supporting, Grace House, the other charities, and our military families with those toys. Bikes were normally her thing. I don't think bikes are in order this year, but we already started to receive donations, the HOA has, from our local residents to buy toys for those kids. So please just stop by or watch out. I think we're going to do something to the same effect we did for the turkey drive for the food pantry. That was a fantastic success at the drop-off locations throughout different restaurants here in Indian Rocks. So that's coming up.
Thank you, Joe. Diane Flagg, Commissioner, do you have any comments you'd like to make tonight?
Well, I just wanted to thank the city and Matt for allowing me to participate on Zoom. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, and wish everybody a very happy holiday.
Okay, thank you. The comment from Dr. Magdy, do we want to discuss this at a later time? Would the commission like to discuss this, or what? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Like a work session to discuss.
Yeah.
I think that's all I was worthwhile to get input.
All right. Any upcoming agenda, Greg, we could have a conversation about some of the comments of Dr. Magdy.
If the other commissioners.
With the other commissioners, how do you feel about that?
Sure.
Joe? Commissioner Flagg?
Yes, I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. With that, do we have any additions or deletions tonight? Hearing none. Our consent agenda, we have no consent agenda. I don't think that's ever happened.
I guess the minutes will come next.
Yes, we'll have minutes at the next meeting. And with that, we'll go to public hearing. 6A is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and are you going to present the whole item tonight, or is Randy going to read it first, Leanne? How would you two like to?
I think he needs to read the title.
Okay.
All
Mr.
right,
Moore?
item 6A.
Yes, sir.
Item 6A on the agenda is an alcoholic beverage designation application for the property at 8225, for the address of 213 Gulf Boulevard, Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, 33785. This is a quasi-judicial hearing wherein you will consider the competent substantial evidence submitted to you before you tonight in the record and through testimony. Before we begin, has any member of this body had any ex parte communications with the applicant, that is, you talked to the applicant outside of this meeting about the relief requested herein?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Let the record reflect all have responded in the negative. Has anybody here conducted a site visit for the limited purpose of evaluating the application before you this evening? This does not include driving by incidentally in a small community and peering out the window, but more specifically, doing some investigative effort.
No.
Let the record reflect all have responded in the negative. Before we will proceed, will anybody who intends to offer any testimony on this matter, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you are going to give this evening is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much. With that, Madam Clerk.
This is an application for a 4-COP SFS, which is the sale of beer, wine, and liquor on premises and off premises from location at 213 Gulf Boulevard, which is the old location of Aqua Prime. And excuse me if I don't pronounce your last name right. Nicholas Rapsardi?
Close enough.
Close enough. He is the he is the one that the alcoholic beverage will be, the name will be in. They have entered into a commercial lease with Aqua Prime Real Estate LLC. The surrounding zoning is B business on the east side of Gulf Boulevard with CT commercial tours on the west side of Gulf Boulevard. There's a single-story masonry building on the property, including an outside bar and patio area. The property is located within the Business District Triangle Overlay Zone. VIP, the establishment will be called VIP IRB Mexican American Cuisine. Will have 110 interior seats and 40 exterior seats and 52 parking places. It has been determined by the planning consultant that the application complies with Chapter 6 alcoholic beverages. A review of the application by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office per records maintained within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office shows a criminal record for Nicholas Rapsari. One is a DUI and one is reckless driving. If this is approved, staff recommends that the following statement be added with the following stipulation: repeated or intermittent nuisance activities and/or unlawful noise levels originating from the establishment or the parking area may result in the revocation of the alcoholic beverage designation. As you see on the site plan in their application, this page here, they're not going to be serving in the building first. They're going to be using the outside bar area and the patio area to begin with. So in the beginning, there's not going to be anything in the masonry business, in the masonry building. It's just going to be the outside bar area and the patio area. And I'm sure the applicant can explain that more. And that's pretty much all I have.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Deanne at this time? Any?
No.
Diane, do you have any questions for Deanne at this time?
No, not down there.
Okay. I think that we will bring up the applicant at this time. You will state your name and your address, and if you want to give us just kind of a scenario of what you intend to do.
Thank you. Nicholas Travisardi, 213 Gulf Boulevard, Indian Rocks Beach, 33785. So just in short, well, just to clarify, when it comes to the seating, we are going to have some seating inside. It's not going to be strictly to the outside. There's a bar that, the shutter's open, there's a bar that seats inside and outside as well. We are coming from a place in Treasure Island that we see a maximum occupancy of 85, inside and outside. We've had the restaurant since 1994, my family has. My mother and my father bought it. After I got out of college, I took over, my father passed away. I've been running it since then, since basically 2002. It's grown exponentially. We're exceeding the capacity of what we have right now. Shane Crawford, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the name, came to me. His CEO is Dale Schmidt, who is the owner of the property. Presented me with the opportunity back in, I believe, February. And although we have a successful restaurant right now, there is need for more. There is a draw for more. And we've outgrown our space, and this particular opportunity was just screaming at me that this is the right thing to do. Forgive me because this is my first time doing this. Coming out of school, to go to that restaurant, this is a whole new process to me as far as, opening a new place, going through the whole licensing and all that being considered. I feel like we're going to be a very big draw for the area. I love Indian Rocks Beach. I grew up in Seminole, lived in Seminole for 25 years, went to high school at Seminole High. I love all the beaches around here. What else?
That's good. When were you thinking that? I think you said maybe March.
We would hope March at the very latest. If we can get all the staffing and everything goes well as far as licensing, obviously what we're doing here today, everything falls into place correctly, we would like to be able to open in February. Probably March at the very latest would be the most feasible idea. We have affordable food, huge portions, a very different array of things than any other place offers when it comes to Mexican cuisine or American cuisine. We pride ourselves on what we do there. Really looking forward to being a part of this.
Is there any of the commissioners, do you have any questions at this time?
I-
For that? Yes, sir.
Yeah, does this include what was formerly known as the off-the-grid barbecue? spot?
So, yeah, in the lease, we have use of the entire building, should we see fit to use it. Right now, the plans are, and Deanne, I have a revised drawing, just, I think I emailed you, I'm not sure if you got it, but I'll give you one that, because I know I sent you like 4 different specs because the place is so large. I try to compact it into one, and I can give you that before I leave, kind of expanding what we plan on using. Eventually, we would love to be able to expand into the entire restaurant, but if you really count the spots in there, like the seats, you're looking at upwards of 250 seats. Again, I'm coming from a place that inside and out serves 85. I don't want to go outside my realm of what I know right now, so we're going to start small and grow into it. We really want to gravitate upon the takeout aspect of it, catering. That kitchen is very big. We're going from a kitchen that, the kitchen that we're going from is probably the size of one of the stalls in one of the bathrooms at this current place right now. We have 1 fryer, we have 1 flat top, and typically on any Friday night, we have to take the phone off the hook and stop taking to-go orders. As far as the off-the-grid area, we probably look at that as more of if people need to wait while they're waiting for a table, they can sit out there and wait. Really have no plans other than that for it right now at this point. I know that Off the Grid was, they had 2 restaurants there, if I'm not mistaken. They had Off the Grid and they had Aqua Prime. They had cornhole tournaments and all kinds of stuff and jazz going on there. Right now, we just want to be able to make our tacos and our burritos and margaritas and make people happy in the area that we're kind of looking at right now, and slowly, gradually move in towards the inside of the restaurant. It's nice, we've learned with COVID right now how valuable outdoor seating is, and having that area is great to know that we have it should we need it, as far as maybe people picking up takeout food and sitting down and eating it with not necessarily serving people at those tables, but having that area because it allows for much safer social distancing and all the requirements from the CDC when it comes to COVID right now, because it's been a roller coaster this entire year for restaurants.
I'm just trying to make it simple for you
Commissioner
guys.
Hoofnagel, that piece of property where Off the Grid was is not part of this application. That is a different address, and that address was not included within this application.
That's what I'm getting at, exactly.
This is a whole
This
different.
is not about, I'm trying to make your life easier
Okay.
later, not, so I don't, if this is prepared and it doesn't have the entirety of your leasehold,
Mhm.
and you later wish to expand into that area that's not in here, you would be having to go through this process a second time. I don't know how that translates into the state licensing either, but you,
So you're saying is there's an entirely different address for the Off the Grid
Off the
portion
Grid,
of it?
yes, has a different
your
legal.
leasehold may have that in it, but this application as it presently is written does not include that. That's what Deanne is saying.
Right, and also the letter that Aqua Prime Real Estate LLC gave us only lists 213 Gulf Boulevard.
Which sort of ends at where the masonry building ends. However, in this map where there's an outdoor hood shown, that's where they were serving the food from Off the Grid. So, I want to encourage you to get this done. I also want to encourage you to get it done properly, and I would suggest that some of these drawings are hard to interpret. There's many of them. You may be doing yourself a disservice. I don't want to discourage you from getting a license. I'm just saying if you draw the drawings properly and make sure all the addresses are consistent with your lease, you would forego some potential future problems. I don't want to discourage you from this.
Right, I had no idea there was an entirely separate address for Off the Grid. So it's part of the same building, but it has a separate address as well?
Yeah, they were buying up different parcels. There's a whole long story in there, but yeah.
And more specifically, and my name is Randy Moore, I'm the city attorney. More specifically, what's being explained is as it relates to this process, you're seeking the blessing, if you will, of this commission to operate using alcohol on that. And the way, at least historically, it's been done
as it relates to that property, is that permission was given, and then they said, oh, we bought this lot next door, it's contiguous, it's part of it, but we need to expand the license. Okay, that's a separate blessing. And what Commissioner Hoofnagel is saying to you is, as framed, you've really only asked for A, not A and B. And he just wants to make sure you're aware of that, because that may mean if you go into B, you'll have to come back all over again.
Okay.
Ultimately, how we proceed from here, if that information changes what you want to do tonight, that is entirely your decision. And what I mean by that is, proceed on what you got, get going, and if you need to come back, you'll do the Mother May I and you'll come back. Or you can say, you know what, I want to regroup, I voluntarily withdraw my application, and I'll come back another day once I've made heads or tails of this. I think is sort of what the Commissioner's alluding to as another option for you. Ultimately, you are the applicant, you are the property owner, you are the individual who is seeking rights and seeking to assert their rights, and so that's a decision to make as to how you want to proceed. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot as you've come up and said this is the first time you've done anything like this. We're not trying to make this a harder pop quiz than you signed up for. But I just want to make sure you have the information you need in complete candor now that additional information has been given to you, so that you can make whatever decision you think best as the business owner.
So as it stands, this application only applies to, so this application that we have right now applies to not that area, not the off-the-grid area.
That's
should I
accurate
decide
based
that-
on how this was done historically.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And if we wanted to utilize that area for any reason, we would have to reapply, or,
If you proceeded tonight in your current form, you would have to separately seek for that area, is how
Okay.
that would proceed. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Randy.
Yes, sir.
And also there's a state license, and I don't have any understanding of how that works.
Mhm.
And our experience has been that the state, the APT license, whatever it is, that's usually the thing that takes a lot longer to get approved in the city.
right,
We're gonna give you a hard time about noise and all that kind of stuff, because we wanna make sure it complies with our quality of life. But there's other issues at the state level which tend to take a little bit longer. And so you may wanna make sure your application with the state,
right.
if your intentions are later to have a broader license, you might wanna make sure you've got that in line too.
Okay.
All of this comes with the asterisk, and we can't give you legal advice.
Yeah, we're just
That's your decision to make.
Right.
You've been given some information, somewhat gratuitously in the interest of helping you, but
Mhm.
ultimately it's your decision. If you need to talk to somebody who you're here with as a business partner, investor, or something else
Mhm.
to regroup for a moment, I'm pretty confident the commission would entertain a brief recess for you to do so. If you just want to move ahead and you're comfortable, you've got a sense, that's fine too. It's your call, it's your decision, and you're at the helm of this.
What do you mean by decision saying,
Like, just, do you want to keep, knowing what you know now, does that change
As far as
anything you
the
wish to do at
off-grid
this
area?
time?
okay,
Is really the question.
I have no clue, man. I have no clue.
Okay, so, absent any official decision from the applicant, we would continue through the hearing. So if you have anything else you wish to add, feel free to do so. And if anybody has any other questions, we'll proceed as we ordinarily would.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Thank you. And is there anyone at this time who would like to come forward and state your name and your address? Hi, Lonnie. Yeah.
I'm reading that thing. Good evening. My name's Lonnie Fitton. I live at 210 First Street. My property is just on the north side of this subject property. And I'd like to say, I've always said that property would make a good place for a nice high-end Mexican restaurant, and here they come. So I hope they do well, and I look forward to a friendly, neighborly relationship, unlike the last occupants of this property. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of it, but the notice that you sent to everybody and the notice that is posted on the property does not have the right legal description, although the legal description in the application is correct. So I wanted to bring up the point. Hello?
That's this background.
It's background noise.
As far as you were talking about the off-the-grid property, that's actually 208 First Street, that's lot 13.
Correct.
On the northwest corner of the property, of the bar, of the Aqua Prime building, they have that service window bar area that you can only access through lot 13, which is 208 First Street. Without including that property, I don't see how they're going to be able to utilize that. Because you can only go to that window by accessing 208 First Street property.
They'll have to figure that out.
That's, you want to, go ahead, Blake.
Because the property line runs about a foot away from the building, actually. That's very close. Let's see, what else did I have? I had a question about parking. The statement in here on page 2 of the agenda memo states parking is shared with other tenants in this commercial plaza.
That was a mistake on my part.
Okay, I wasn't sure what that meant. Also in the application, it says there is 52 parking spots. Well, the current layout of the parking spaces only has 42 parking spots, so I'm curious where the other 10 will be coming from. What about the new tenant at Lighthouse Donuts?
We're
Yeah.
refreshing our own interpretation of that.
Right. So Lighthouse Donuts now has new tenants. And I'm sure they won't be pleased sharing our 8 parking spots with VIP. And also this drawing, what you say you submitted new ones. I think the outdoor seating shows like 62 seats on the drawing that he submitted. And he's claiming on the application there's only going to be 40 seats.
Thank you, Ronnie.
And that was just some questions I had.
Okay.
That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Greg,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to let the rest of
Go
the
ahead,
people talk, go back to you. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak at this time? Please come forward.
I'm only speaking so I can take my mask off.
That's okay.
Why might I speak again?
Nancy Obarski, 708 Beach Trail. My question is, how does a prospective business owner in this town, who we should be applauding with the roof coming off, how does he get to this point before he discovers this? I mean, isn't there a process by which the city sits down with an applicant like this, looks at his lease, says, oh, wait a minute, you got this and this in your lease, but your application, we don't have anybody that does that? So that this, I don't know how long it took him to get on this agenda. But now if he decides not to move forward with what is obviously incorrect, he's got to come back, get back on the agenda. It affects him in terms of money. So, you know, in my time in Indian Rocks Beach, I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen this happen. I mean, we really need to get it straight internally so that when somebody comes in for an application, there's a checklist. Somebody goes through and says, hey, wait a minute, pal, your stuff doesn't match up, so that he doesn't wait and come all the way in here and get this. I mean, it's kind of aggravating to see it happen over and over again, and nobody ever puts a system in that heads it off. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Is there anyone who'd like to come for or against this? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing. Greg, I'm going to give you... Oh, is there anyone on Zoom, Matt, that would like to speak on this application?
Madam Mayor, I have queried and there's no participation at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's just a couple things. The access to the side door that was referenced earlier, they don't need a liquor license to go across the property to access the door.
Okay.
If they're not operating, they can get there. Second thing is, they meet the parking requirements. In fact, they will be sharing some parking because the restaurant that's going in what used to be the donut shop, they're going to only be open like for breakfast and lunch. And that was the same arrangement they had before.
Okay.
The third thing is, the comment that was just made about somebody getting their act together. And I don't know, maybe I can talk to the speaker later about other examples, I'd like to know what those are. But if you look at the applicant's packet, every drawing only shows improvements on, or where their activity is gonna be on the property that we listed for their application on the legal notices and all that.
Yes.
So until tonight, when there was a reference made about what are you gonna do with the barbecue property, that's hadn't been brought up to us.
Okay.
So we're basing our review on what they submitted, and as Randy mentioned, and as the applicant mentioned, if his business grows, and we hope it does, so Michelle and I don't have to drive to Treasure Island to get a VIP anymore. Hopefully, and they can come back and rectify that, but, let's lay aside any mistaken comment that there's errors. There may be things referenced to, Lonnie mentioned the sign, I don't know about the sign, we'll look at the sign. As far as the application and what we acted on, and this process is led by the city clerk, there's no errors here. Because you can flip through your own packet and see that what we reviewed was what he asked for. And we will gracefully accommodate him, because we know he's gonna grow. And, but if he wants to serve liquor or involve that property that involves alcohol, he'll come back to y'all on that. But there's no land use issue with him coming off the street and going across that property to get to that door, because that's not just the property is for restaurant or for alcohol, so it's what they're asking you for. And that's the only thing that, I was just a reminder, that's the only thing the commission is considering is the top issue of whether you're gonna grant the alcohol license. Everything else is administratively, but once again, just to clarify one more time, the staff review, particularly the city clerk and the city planner review what the applicant submitted, and it matches. If you look at the drawings, it matches. The issue of the barbecue site came up tonight, not in his application.
Thank you, Greg. Do any of the commissioners have any comments that they'd like to make?
I do, I wanted, and I think it's true that you come up tonight, because that's our role as a deliberative body in a lot of judicial settings, to make sure we're looking at the facts and circumstances in approving the license. And while the ability to walk on that lot is not an issue with respect to the alcohol license, were it to happen that tables and chairs were set up, or people were milling about with beers and cocktails in their hands on that lot, that's where the licensing could become an issue. And I think what we need to do as a city is let the applicant know that should that come to pass, that that's something you want to have happen, there's an additional licensing that you have to go through to get that to happen. That's all. That's why I say I don't want to distract you from getting this done, but there is a limitation in terms of what you're requesting. We're letting you know that in good faith, and I think that's pretty proactive of us. So contrary to what some of the public may have said, I think it's good that we pick out those things and let you know that that's something that you may have to address in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hofnagle. Commissioner Flagg, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Right now, Mayor, I was confused about that property too, but I think the city manager explained it correctly. So any granting of this license would not include that 208 property, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Hannon, do you have any
No
questions?
comment.
Mr. McCall, Commissioner?
No comment this time.
Randy, do you want to add anything at this moment?
I have nothing to add, Madam Mayor, except to say the applicant should have an opportunity to provide any final words or statements they
I
wish
was
to make.
just going to ask them to come up at your direction. Nick, if you'd like to come back up, do you have any other comments that you want to make before we?
And just to be clear, as far as process, it's your application, so you get the last word. That's all this is. It's not like getting called back to the president.
Sure, I appreciate it, you guys being, helping me out with this. As it stands, if that's how, if it should be accepted, we won't serve alcohol. If we decide that we want to, as far as Act 208, is it? The barbecue area, we'll follow up with something with that down the road and try to get that going, but right now, we're just really focusing on 213 in the restaurant, and that's about it, you know. And I'll try my best to come in and be proactive with you guys and ask as many questions as I can, and just help you hold my hand through this thing, and I'll speak with my attorney as much. I'm not gonna insist on you guys walking me through this whole thing. I have people around me that, you know, should have directed me a little bit better. I wasn't aware of the, I thought it was one address. I know it's separate lots and whatnot, but we'll figure it out. So, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
You're a breath of fresh air, trust me. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the request for an alcoholic beverage use designation for COP-SFS for the establishment located at 213 Gulf Boulevard with the following stipulation: repeated or intermittent nuisance activity and/or unlawful noise levels originating from the establishment or the parking area may result in the revocation of the alcoholic beverage designation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion from the maker or the second?
No, just, we show a lot of light. It's true.
Thank you, gentlemen. Deanne, would you like to call the roll?
Commissioner Fly,
Yes.
Commissioner McCall,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hannah,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoofnagel,
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes, motion carries. We'll see you in February, not March. Did you hear me? Just kidding. You are free to go, and we wish you much success.
Thank you
in
so much.
Ross Beach. We look forward to being.
Appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a good night.
We are now at public hearing 6B, ordinance number 2020-09, public hearing. This is a second final reading. Randy, would you do us the honor of reading this?
Happily, Madam Mayor, ordinance number 2020-09, an ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 74, Waterways, creating Article 4 to be entitled Leave No Trace, creating Section 74-100, purpose and title, creating Section 74-101, definitions, creating Section 74-102, digging holes on the beach, creating Section 74-103, obstructions on the beach and beach access areas prohibited, creating Section 74-104, exceptions, creating Section 74-105, permits, creating Section 74-106, fires prohibited, repealing Chapter 26, Environment, Article 5, Junk, Wrecked, or Abandoned Property, Division 1, generally Section 26-131, confiscation of abandoned property, repealing Chapter 74, Waterways, Article 3, Beaches, Division 1, generally Section 74-65, tents, canopies, and volleyball nets, creating a Leave No Trace ordinance, prohibiting the leaving or abandonment of personal property on the city's beaches, prohibiting unfilled holes on the city's beaches, prohibiting the obstruction of the beach and beach access, providing for exceptions, providing for a permitting process, prohibiting fires on the beach, providing for legislative findings, and providing for an effective date thereof. This has been a second and final reading of ordinance number 2020-09, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Mims, would you like to present?
Yeah, but I'm not gonna talk as fast as Randy. This is, like Randy mentioned, this is the second reading, and basically, we've talked about this in work sessions, we talked about this in numerous public meetings. The gist of this ordinance is if you bring it to the beach, you take it with you. If you don't take it with you, after 10 o'clock at night, the city has the legal authority to make a run down the beach and pick the stuff up and store it. One thing that I talked to Commissioner Hoofnagel about earlier, if you turn with me to 74-102 D.
103.
I'm sorry, 74-103 D. And if you go to the bottom of the paragraph, we deleted, for the last meeting, we deleted some information out there. And if you read the sentence where it says the dry sand and you continue on the next page, there's items 1 through 4 that are listed. And Ed had a really good idea, as he always does. And that, what I recommend that you do, just for clarity's sake, is that we would delete items 1 through 4. And instead of saying items 1 through 4, we would add a sentence that would be right after the last sentence in the paragraph that would say items of personal property shall not be left on the dry sand. And that's really, Wealthy Ford tries to say that in different ways, but just for clarity's sake, we would just say, I'll repeat it again,
Yes.
items of personal property shall not be left on the dry sand.
Okay.
And there again, that's just to make it as clean as we can. If you bring it, you take it with it. And we're not involving ourselves with anything over the dunes and on private property that's on the dry sand. So I think that was a really good suggestion to eliminate those four, just clearly say, if you leave it on the, you can't leave anything on the dry sand, we're gonna pick it up.
Could you say that one more time?
I'll give it to you.
Okay, so whoever makes a motion, that would be part of your motion.
And that's really the only substantial change other than a couple of tweaks y'all made last time.
Okay.
So that's it.
Does anyone have any questions for the city manager or comments? Commissioner McCall?
Just as we talked before, this was, last meeting was kind of late, it was a bit under the weather. We talked about a couple of meetings ago, like enforcing some of the fishing ordinances, that sort of thing. I guess one of my concerns is the part of this about prohibiting unfilled holes on the beach. I'm just trying to think, how are we gonna, like...
That's more of an educational thing.
Right, but
I mean, we're not gonna, the reality of me having a code enforcement person that's on the beach when the family decides to stand and leave the beach and go fill that hole in.
That's what I'm thinking.
But there are things that are placed in ordinances sometimes to be more educational than enforcement. But we could be down there at the right time and have an opportunity to go with it. Believe it or not, and you probably have seen that, but you'd be surprised how we will go fill in holes that are 4 feet wide and 2 feet deep and those kind of things. But it's a standard, the other ordinance that we looked at, this is a standard thing, kind of an educational thing that's put in there. And the chance, and it's kind of like having a litter ordinance. The only way that we could cite somebody for littering is if we literally have to witness them doing it, but it's for thou shalt not litter. So I would address it that way, and I think Randy was trying to...
Yeah, I think when we look at these codes, I do think it's very, very prudent to give consideration, it is very prudent to give consideration to the issue of can we enforce what we're talking about. I also think, though, that it's important to keep mind of the discretionary element of will there ever be a situation where we may need to enforce this? Taken to its logical end, things like business tax receipts could be used to enforce against every little 6-year-old who sets up a lemonade stand on a hot day in August.
Sure.
Some communities have done that and rightfully been ridiculed for it and said, to the letter of the rule, we apply it. Instead of, some kind of city manager edict just saying, yeah, not for that. Similarly, I don't think it is the intention, in fact, I know it was not the intention of the drafters putting this together or the intention of your present composition of city administration to stand over every 6-year-old and say, this is the day that we teach you the lesson about Johnny Law. However, I think you can all think of a situation, I grew up in the early 2000s TV, BAM and Jackass and all these sorts of shows where you just do something outlandish for attention's sake, right?
Sure.
So let's say somebody says, well, we've been taught to quarantine, I'm going to dig a hole and live in this hole for a week on the beach. And then they do that, they get their web likes, they walk away, and they leave a giant excavated hole where they'd set up, to live for 2 nights. Now you actually have something you can work, because then inevitably I get asked the question, what do we do? It's like, I don't know, they're digging on the beach. Does have anything about digging on beaches? I know it's tempting to say we don't need something for the outliers. But I would suggest to you that there are situations, and I think you can think of examples in your own community where you could say, hi, I never really thought anybody would do something like that. I'm not really sure what to do about it. Again, I would emphasize that's not with an eye. The spirit of this ordinance is preservation of the very valuable resource you have in your beaches. I think the public comment tonight bore that out as private property owners, but as well as members of this community. And I would just say that having something that says, hey, if you're really just tearing it up with no mind towards the maintenance or the way it may affect others, we want to be able to address
You know, if one other thing about that, Joe, if I can, and since Randy went there, I'll go there also, is that, and I was not gonna address it directly, but I will now, is that we have on at least 4 different occasions during the 7 years I've been here, with the same group of individuals that have trenched, dug, put plywood over, put sand on top, and it was pretty easy to figure out, because we can get on the internet and figure it out.
Right.
So that's another reason why this is in here on that rare occasion where, because that could happen again, but it's reality, fortunately it didn't happen, but that's why things like that are in ordinances, because it's just as sure as we don't put it in there, and y'all adopt that, then next week, the same location will dig the trench and cover it, and we have no legal ability to really make them do anything with it.
And to your point, I mean, I was thinking about it more of a, like you say, an educational situation instead of a rule, but that makes good sense, because as long as, just didn't want patrons, like you said, chasing little Johnny down the beach because he built the sand castle.
We won't be doing it.
Fair enough. That was it for me.
Commissioner Flagg, do you have any comments at this time?
No, I don't, and, I'm ready.
Okay. Matt, I'm gonna start with you. Is there anyone, as far as on Zoom, who'd like to speak at this time?
Madam Mayor, I've made several requests to the public to respond. I want to, for the benefit of those who have joined afterwards, we now have 10 participants as opposed to 8. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a few options. You're going to see a chat button, a participants button, and as well as a more button with 3 dots. If you hit that more button with the 3 dots, you'll see the opportunity to raise your hand. We will then recognize you, and just to let you know, you will have to unmute yourself, and that after you're recognized, please state your first and last name and your address. At this time, Madam Mayor, I see no participants. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll open the public comment. Is there anyone who'd like to come forward at this time? Please state your name. Mr. House.
Don House, 2104 Beach Trail. Okay, so I read this thing like 3 times, and obviously digging holes was not a big deal. There was a few things in there I really wasn't quite sure of. Where it says beach easement, it says no one is allowed to put anything there and leave it.
Yes, we do.
Hey.
Pull up a chair.
So anyway, so when around, okay, friends. So anyway, so it says where the beach easement is, no one's allowed to put anything there and leave at all, as if I read it. In other words, if a couple put their chairs in the beach easement part and went swimming, that would be illegal, okay?
Randy, is there, I'm not, sorry to interrupt you, Don.
No.
You're not making a reference to a section of the ordinance, so I'm trying to follow where you're.
74103 subsection B.
Thank you.
Like last month, there must have been 5 weddings between 21st and 22nd at the beach easement, and they would.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, to my reading,
Okay.
Randy, can you confirm, is there anything dealing with an easement in here?
No, the beach accesses, I'm sorry, beach access. Oh my God, I got easement on the brain.
Yeah, no, that's why, sorry. I think we all did this one. Sorry, Don, go ahead.
The beach accesses, I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, start the clock over, okay? That's with the beach accesses, there, you can't put anything there and walk away from it at all. So, within the last month, there was a bunch of weddings between 21st and 22nd. They seem to like that area. So anyway, they set up stuff and all that, and they walk away from it. I'm assuming this might be the same thing as digging the holes, just in case something happens. I don't know.
There's no prohibition of anybody leaving anything on the easements, and then weddings are permitted.
Accesses.
There's nothing that prohibits that. And weddings are permitted through a different process through City Hall.
Okay, well, yeah, and I actually talked to one of the people that was doing the wedding, and they said it was, the reason they come here was that Clearwater got so bad about permits that they just come down here, they don't even pull a permit as long as it's less than 25 people. Is that true?
That's correct. If you're less than 50, it does not require a permit.
Right, okay, 50, okay. So they're having weddings there, but they're setting up stuff.
The access area is very narrowly defined in the ordinance. And it's mostly the boardwalks and the sidewalks and everything coming down to the boardwalks to get onto the beach.
So it's not the access, it's not the width of the access all the way out to the high water mark?
No, it's the public beach access points in the city identified by the appropriate signage, including the boardwalks, walkways, and the dedicated parking areas, and the area on the beach beginning at the entrance perpendicular with the applicable road right-of-way to the water's edge. There's like a really, so there would be a slice that would go down from the walkway to the water's edge.
So it's not the entire width of the entire, okay.
No, it's that, there's some theoretical perpendicular.
Because the people that come and paint there, they might have done that, sunset painting, anyway, they set up a bunch of stuff there. Just trying to make sure that we're all on the same page.
They also have a permit to do that.
Do they? Okay, all right. Nobody's hollering, I'm just trying to make sure that we're not.
I appreciate what you're saying.
Right.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
You were saying.
Hey, information, good thing. Thank you.
Yeah, and similarly, I would add, of course, the city's not taking the action of discouraging the inherent activities and other, the inherent elements of other activities that it's permitting. One of the issues this ordinance specifically sought to address, as I understand from management, is especially in the last year, people making a habit of sort of playing dibs with the beach. Dibs, my chair is here. And if we say, okay, you can't have anything on the beach, fine, dibs, I left it on the boardwalk and then I ran out at 5:30 in the morning because my stuff was already set up, and that's really what this is.
Oh, by the way, I do have a sailboat on the beach too.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to come up at this time?
I bet he doesn't put the toilet seat down either.
Hey! And I have really bad aim too, okay? I have really bad aim.
Oh, God.
Public record.
Nancy Obarski, 708 Beach Trail. I really do applaud your efforts here to try to clean up the beach. I mean, I see it every day behind my house with tents that people buy for $79 and just go home and leave it. I was also excited that you stated that you had no intention of affecting the beachfront owners' riparian rights. But then there's things I see in the text that go on, at least in my opinion, to do just that. And what I'm about to tell you, I know I can't ask the city attorney, so one of you is probably going to have to do the dirty work. The reference to the city's customary use ordinance, and I don't know how many of you remember that. It was done in 2018. It's 2018-03. I'm a little puzzled about that. Those of you who were involved in drafting this ordinance know that it was intended to preserve the public's use of the beach by relying on a long history of continuing use going all the way back, I think, to the Indians. It was a wonderful historical piece, actually. The problem with that, as I see it, is 3 days later, after you adopted yours, House Bill 631, which eventually became Florida Statute 163.035, it went on in effect, and not in effect. It said the following: a governmental entity may not adopt or keep in effect, again it says may not adopt or keep in effect, an ordinance or rule that finds, determines, relies on, or is based upon customary use, or any portion of a beach above the mean high water line, etc., 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 unless such ordinance or rule is based on a judicial declaration affirming recreational customary use on such beach. So in addition to the requirement that it be ratified by a court of law, the affected property owners were supposed to have been notified by certified mail, neither of which happened in the case of your ordinance. I believe the city is still allowed to use this as an affirmative defense in litigation, but House Bill 631 says it cannot stay in effect. Yet it is referenced over and over again throughout this leave no trace ordinance. And instead of referring to the erosion control line like the Army Corps does, at least the erosion control line, you know, this is private property, this is public property. You've accepted, you describe your line of demarcation as up to the line of permanent vegetation. And that line makes no distinction between what is private and what is public, like the term erosion control line does. Using an ambiguous term like that makes me nervous, and quite honestly, that's one of the reasons that the beachfront owners are reluctant to grant public use over our private land in perpetuity because of things like that. And I just can't imagine the chaos that's going to ensue when the sheriff tries to enforce this new ordinance and there is no definition of what's private and what's public and so forth and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who's in the audience tonight who would like to speak on this agenda item? Hearing none, is there anybody on Zoom? Mr. Mayor?
No, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We will close the public hearing. I am looking for a motion and then.
I just have a question for the attorney.
Okay, go right ahead.
Randy, I'm not seeing anything in here about the custom use. Where is it residing?
I don't believe and if you can point me to an exact language, I know there was discussion at the last meeting of taking the language in sub D and aligning it with that language referenced in the customary use ordinance. I don't believe that there's a specific invocation of the customary use ordinance here.
I didn't say anything.
I would also add the statutory provision cited respectfully has a great deal of nuance, ambiguity, and is wrought with problems. The same provision that would suggest that a community could not do that without a judicial determination specifically states that it does not apply to a governmental entity with an ordinance or rule adopted in effect on or before January 1, 2016, and does not deprive a governmental entity from raising customary use in any proceeding challenging an ordinance or rule adopted before July 1, 2018, and that was the date before which we adopted ours. And so there's a lot of legal wrangling about what this statute meant in the first place. But beyond that, in this particular ordinance, for the matter at issue here, I don't see any reference to customary use specifically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would make a motion to approve the ordinance if there's no further comments.
And is that including the delayed 1 through 4?
Yeah, if there was no comments, I was going to make the motion.
Well, if anyone has any comments, they can make those comments after you make your motion.
That's fair. Okay. So I would move to approve ordinance 2020-09 with the edits indicated by Mr. Mims, specifically 74-103D, eliminating subparts 1, 2, 3, and 4, and replacing it with a sentence that reads, no personal property may be left from the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the dry sand. Period.
Perfect. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. McCall. Is there anyone, is there any further comments from either the maker or the second?
I think there's issues which are always brought up, and we can't solve them all. I think this is a good attempt to embody what the will of the commission is to help protect our city's beach from garbage. And that's really what this is.
It is, and we've had such a problem with that, the last few years. So
But there are issues. I mean, there's always
There
been
is,
little issues. I just think, and I think that the specific reference that we don't envision anything in here being able to restrict private property rights. I think that goes a long way towards addressing if there's anything unclear or maybe in conflict with the private property rights. I think you guys, Randy, I think you did a nice job. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, Deanne, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Flatt,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hannah,
Yes.
Commissioner McCall,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoofnagel,
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to ordinance number 2020-10, which is agenda item 6C, public hearing and another second and final reading. Randy, would you read, please?
Happily, Madam Mayor, City of Indian Rocks Beach, ordinance number 2020-10, an ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 38, Parks and Recreation, Article 2, Parks, Section 38-31, Park Hours, Special Events, amending Article 3, Skate Facility, Section 38-51, Hours of Operation, amending Article 4, Nature Preserve, Division 1, Generally, Section 38-100, General, amending Division 2, Boardwalk, Section 38-116, Usage Regulations, amending Article 5, Keegan Clare Boat Docks, Section 38-40, Hours of Operation, amending the hours of operation of parks throughout the city, reserving repealed sections, providing for legislative findings, correcting scrivener's errors, and providing for an effective date thereof. This has been a second and final reading of ordinance number 2020-10.
Thank you, Randy.
Just summarize what this is, like we talked about this at length, is 10th Avenue Park, Brown Park, and the Nature Preserve, if approved, would be open from 7 a.m. to dusk. Currently, the Nature Preserve is open well into the evening, and that's not been really a good thing for a lot of reasons. And within that same park, the boardwalk would also close, obviously, at the same time. The Keegan Clare Park, the renovated park, the parking area, the boat docks, Bowery boat docks would be open from 7 to 11. Cole Park would be open from 7 to 9. And the only exception I'll just remind you of in that is a lease that we have with the Little League. They can do their activities until 10 o'clock. And then the skate facility now will be open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. So the biggest thing this ordinance was trying to accomplish, at least from the staff's part, was to close the parks that, like Brown Park and the Nature Preserve, close the parks that there's no lights and there's not really any nighttime activities. To try to close those off due to issues that we've had there, but I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Ed, do you have any questions that you want to bring up? I know that you received some
Yes, I
emails.
received a lot of correspondence from people who were abutting the pickleball courts, and they were asking that they felt it was not equitable for the skate facility to have a later start time than the pickleball courts, when the noise levels on both are arguably similar. I told them I would bring their concerns to the body for discussion.
So at this time, what it is now is 7 a.m.?
Yeah, in the ordinance way it's drafted, it would stay at 7 a.m.
And it would stay, that's what it says in here, yes.
And I will tell you, because I've had conversations with a couple of commission members individually, so I took the opportunity to look at area-wide, Pinellas County-wide, other cities, tennis pickleball courts to look at hours, and I can report back to you that there's no standard. St. Petersburg has a number of their pickleball courts that start 30 minutes before sunrise. There's some that start at 7, and I think the latest one I found was one complex that started at 9. And one thing you have to remember is different about the pickleball courts, the tennis courts that also allow pickleball, is a lot of these cities that have pickleball tennis courts are in a rec facility, where you go in a lobby, you check in, and some cities even require you to pay, or you reserve a court and you go play. So that's the difference. Our tennis courts, pickleball courts, are in an open air, open to the public complex. But as far as hours, it's like any other ordinance that you would consider. That's up to y'all. I'll just tell you from an administrative standpoint that if the park opens at 7, which people are out early, I don't know if you get out there early, but people are out walking and out and about, is if you change and we can deal with it, if you change the pickleball tennis court hours to a different hour, and then what we're gonna have to figure out staff-wise is how to do that. And we can do it. You know, we'll have to figure out how it's gonna get locked up at night, and how it's gonna, and staff could open it up at whatever time y'all say, but yeah, I hope when I did my quick review of hours, that there'd be some consistent pattern of hours, but there's not. Everybody's got different hours. So there again, the commission sets park hours, just like you set the hours for the skate park and just all these things that we're talking about, you can surely set. You know, if you do it, you'll need to do it in Cole Park. If you change the hours for pickleball, you in Cole Park, you will have to do it for the tennis courts and pickleball because they play pickleball on all those courts, so we have to be consistent with that. So I wish I could tell you that there's a trend and there's a common starting time, but there's really not. It's all over.
Commissioner Flagg, do you have any comments as far as the hours?
Well, I think originally we talked about 7 a.m. because, you know, so many seniors are up and exercising and playing pickleball. They show up there at that time. And, you know, we start all of our trash pickup early. We do all the lawn maintenance in the park. You know, there are usually, if there are people playing pickleball at 7:30, you're also hearing blowers and lawnmowers. And then we have other activities in that park that go later in the evening because with baseball and skate park. So do we inhibit one start time but then not the later time? I think it was an overall time that most people I talked to felt comfortable using, especially, you know, in the heat of the summer. You know, playing later hours isn't very conducive, especially if you're a senior and you're playing pickleball. But, you know, I'd like to hear the commission's opinions on that. We did one vote and so we talked about it before. This is the first reading, so, you know, I'll welcome everybody's comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Flagg. Do any of the commissioners, Ed, do you have any thoughts about the letters, or you just basically, I know that John has sent several.
Yeah, no,
letters.
I'm trying to represent that group who's feeling that they don't have a voice. And
Right.
so what they're saying is the skate park is being allowed to open later, and they don't feel that that's consistent. I think that personally, I think the public benefit to pickleball and exercise sort of outweighs that. But I told them I would represent their view.
Yeah, no,
And that's what I'm here to do. So
Right.
there's a group of people that are unhappy with this.
There is,
And
right.
they would like us to move it out to 7:30 or 8 o'clock or something. That's what they would like.
And so that's my next question. What is the time that they, I thought it said 8 o'clock.
And I get the feeling nothing is going to make anyone happy, but 7:30 would be better than 7. You know,
Okay.
that's kind of what.
The time has changed. But a couple of years ago, it was 9 o'clock, it was 8:30, and the latest thing that I printed out, and I was looking at emails from the same individual, was that now they're saying at least 8. So I think the latest time that I've read is that if the commission saw fit to do it, that they're asking that it not open until 8 o'clock.
Okay. Do any of the other commissioners, before we go out to the public? You got, okay. Is there any on the Zoom, is there any calls in that would like to speak on this before I go out in the auditorium?
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay. At this time, is there any public comment on this issue?
Nancy Obarski, 708 Beach Trail. I really didn't have a dog in this hunt because I wasn't paying attention to what's going on. But the dog just reared its ugly head. Am I correct here in that you are not going to give parking permits to people who are not homesteaded here?
That's not,
That's a different ordinance.
that's not this.
Okay, that's not this.
That's a different ordinance.
Okay,
Different dog.
I'll come back.
Dr. Maggie, do you have any comments to make on this? I know that you are an
Thank
avid
you.
pickleballer, and I'd like to hear what you say.
Thank you. Mike Gabba, Hamid, 101 Rush. I think I agree with Commissioner Flag that playing late in the morning, especially in summer, may not be very visible, especially with, as you know, most of the players are seniors. So that's why many people come in at 7 and almost done by 9, 9:30 at the most. So I hear the complaint about the noise, and definitely I feel for the people who live around the park, but I also feel that, or I think that the city had went really far enough to put those parks around the north side and the west side of the courts, and then planted so many trees and shrubs around the courts as well to minimize the noise. As a player myself, if you play in summer, you have no ventilation through the courts because of those heavy tops. As a player myself, I have very hard time finding the balls when I lose them, or if something goes over the fence. You go out to try to find them, you always find black snakes more than balls. So I think the city, in my opinion, the city had went far enough to accommodate the people living next to the park. And I hate to say it, if you live by a railroad, you know that you are living by the railroad and you're having trains coming across every 5 minutes. But if you're living by a park, you know that there's a place where people can go out, play, have fun, and you have to choose where you want to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this time? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we're looking for a motion. Is there anyone who'd like to make a motion? You're going to make one, Phil? Okay.
Motion to approve 2020-10.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Blythe, second. Is there any comments from the maker or the second?
No, I just think it's, in Florida with everything being so close together, you gotta kind of try to be respectful of others. And the only concern I thought about, it's, I'm going to bring it up now, would be, Diane brought up a good point about trash pickup and all kinds of noise starting at a certain time through the week. But if you really do anything, maybe a Sunday time frame might start an hour earlier or something like that. But that can always be adapted later.
Yes.
I would just like the record to reflect two responses. The first was that there was a feeling from the people living around the pickleball court that when the argument was raised about you live near a railroad track, they lived there before the pickleball court was built, and so they're saying, we didn't know we were going to be living next to the railroad tracks. You guys went and built the railroad tracks later. That's their point of view. The other point of view about the garbage trucks and the leaf blowers, they feel that those noises are intermittent and brief, whereas the noise emanating from the pickleball court is sustained over several hours in the morning and is more of a nuisance.
Thank you, Commissioner Hoffnagel. You did a very good job. Okay, Deanne, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Hookman,
No.
Commissioner McCall,
No.
Commissioner Fly,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hannah,
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes. Motion carries. With that, we will move on to 7 other legislative matters. Ordinance number number 2020-08. This is the first reading. Randy?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Ordinance number 2020-08. An ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 62, Traffic and Vehicles, Article 2, Stopping, Standing, and Parking, increasing the fee for parking violations, restricting the hours of parking on the city's beach accesses, amending the requirements for securing a resident parking permit decal, specifying permissible uses of a resident decal, repealing the provision for temporary guest parking permits, amending the fee for replacing a city-issued parking permit, and providing for severability and an effective date. This has been a first reading of ordinance number 2020-08 by title only, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Randy. Greg, could you present this?
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
Let's go over what the important parts of this ordinance is. One thing that it does, it increases parking fine amounts from $40 to $75. And that's also, there used to be a real convoluted description of just the boat ramp that we find so much per axle or whatever, so we just standardized that and made that the same fee as the parking fine. And this is the right agenda item. We want to wait for Rick to get back here. Or should I proceed?
She's familiar with the details.
Okay. Well, I may have some profound thing that.
I'll stop you when you're late for
But really, okay, so that's, I'll give you the critical things that this does, and what it does and what it doesn't. Second thing it does is it brings clarity to who can receive a resident parking decal. And let me just say before we go any further to that, if you want to pursue, and this is drafted for workshops that we have, the way it's written, there's some pretty clear definitions that in order for you to receive a resident decal, and I believe that was the intent of the original ordinance, although it was interpreted well before I got here, and all kinds of things were done with it. But the way this is drafted is that the only individuals that could receive a resident decal would be if you truly live here, and the ordinance spells out that really what the standards are for that is that once the new cycle of decals would be issued, and right now, because of the first and second reading, we will not issue new decals until February the 1st next year, so the old ones are good until then. Is that in order for you, the way this is written, in order for you to get a new decal, resident decal, you have to have a driver's license and a vehicle registration. There's also a provision there for a utility bill, but those have to be an IRB address. So to answer a question that's being brought up, and we've talked about this, but I won't, because we can do this however y'all want. I'll issue as many decals to as many people. Believe it or not, we have people that call from Largo that beg for decals. Like, man, you can't get a decal, and you don't. But the way this is written, just to be clear, like we were at the last meeting, is that if you don't meet that criteria, a registered vehicle and a driver's license, you don't get a decal. And if you want to change it, you can say, you basically say if you're a resident, and there's some language in here about if you lease property or that kind of thing. And the reason why you need to consider this very seriously is on the east side of Gulf Boulevard, from 5th to 28th at Beach Access 27th, we've had 170 properties that have been converted from either traditional residential or duplexes to vacation rentals. And if you change the wording and you say if you own property, you can go to City Hall, and by the way, there's no limits on them. Most of the people, we probably average 2 decals an address, but we have some that get 4 or 5 because they've got kids. But if you change the wording and you allow for every property owner to get a decal, you're going to, no offense, every vacation rental owner in the residential areas can come get as many decals as they want. And I tell you, from an enforcement standpoint, I tell you what's going to happen to them is they're going to leave them in the vacation rental, and although the ordinance says they have to be permanently affixed, I think I mentioned last time, we took this off the back of the car. The current ordinance says it has to be permanently affixed. This has a magnet on the back of it. And this belongs to a person that lives like in a fourplex. And what we figured out is they got multiple one of these and they all get passed around to their friends and neighbors. So just to be clear, like I said, I'll issue as many as you want. If you want to give them to all the property owners, that's what my concern is that, you're probably gonna be looking in the range, and I'm guessing based on the numbers that we issued this last 2-year cycle. With all these new vacation rentals, I would predict that we're probably gonna be in the $4,000 or $5,000, 4 or 5,000 number of decals. And if you remember my earlier presentation was I told you that we have 73 resident parking spaces in town. So if it's limited to just true residents, you know, we might be around 2,000, maybe a little less if there's van limits. But if you want to do it, you can do it. If you want to allow for these to be issued to all property owners, I just want you to know the reality of that. And the next thing that's critically important, that, and we talked about this before, but I just want to be perfectly clear about this, is that beach accesses. Beach accesses, and we've had, I think Dean told me we have 7 or 8 that were built with grant money. And then the rest of them were done by the city through various years. Beach access, whether they're pedestrian, but in this case where there's parking, those were built to provide parking for the beach. There's no record, there's no intent by the city, they're not part of the grants, but the city built all these beach accesses to provide parking for condos, vacation rentals, people that had cottages that had extra guests. And what this draft does, and there again you can change it, but I just want to point out both sides to you, is that it says in there that no vehicles can be parked in the beach access after 11 o'clock. And the reason why that's important is you have to have a trigger to make somebody move a car, because COVID has kind of slowed this up. And I'm sorry I'm having to go through all this, but I just think it's really important for y'all to understand this. COVID has kind of slowed this up, but we have, and I've said this before, at a number of beach accesses, we have people that don't live on the beach, and they'll take their vehicle with a decal, or maybe not a decal, but some are with, most are with decals. And for whatever reason, they go and park at beach accesses and they leave them there. And we have 2 vehicles at the 12th Avenue Beach Access that I can tell you that are there about 90% of the time. And on the north end, particularly around the 27th Beach Access, there's at least 4 or 5 vehicles that are there a lot. And now the new problem that we've noticed is that people that live on the west side, that have golf carts that have tags in the back, so they can legally operate on the street. Now they're parking those and leaving them there. So the part of this ordinance was that if you have a reason to park at a beach access after 11 o'clock, we can accommodate that by you getting a special hang tag, come to City Hall, and we'll probably, if you leave it in the ordinance, we'll probably set up like you do it online, and we mail them the hang tag, we can work that out. But if you're living in a condo and it's Christmas and your 2 kids are coming over and they've got 3 cars, they can get a hang tag. And if you remember, in the existing ordinance, in fact, if you look at the proposed, you'll see where it's struck. There was a second paragraph that had this real generic hang tag allowance. And that has been widely abused because there was no really guidance on who could get them. There was no guidance on how many they could get. And we literally, every time we go through a new 2-year cycle, the cycles I've been through since I've been here, we literally would have somebody that lived on, I'm going to pick on Joe Street, that would come to City Hall and say, I need 10 hang tags for the year, and there's nothing that keeps them from doing it. So when we had the work session, that's when we talked to y'all about just taking that paragraph out and leaving the paragraph in that says, look, if you want to park in the beach access after 11 o'clock, you've got company, we understand that, but we want you to have a permit to do that, because that makes cars move. So, real quick in summary, the increase in the fine, the provision that what a true resident is and who gets the decals, you can change that. We'll issue one to every property owner if you want to change it. And then the other thing that I've seen a couple emails about is beach accesses, and why can't I park at the beach access after 11 o'clock? And it's usually spun in the spirit of, and I get it, it's usually spun in the spirit of, well, we have condos and we have limited parking. Well, that may be true, but I don't think that was the reason why the city spent our own city money before I got here. And then built at least 7 or 8 with state grants to provide public access, including residents, to go to the beach. Because like I said, if you don't make cars turn over, you're eating up a bunch of spaces. So, you know, I've taken some time, but I don't want y'all to, and we talked about this in work sessions, and that's been completely straight, is that that's what this does. And if you want to change it, we'll issue as many decals as you want us to issue. So it's kind of just the 30,000 foot level of what this is.
I have a question. Does anyone else? So, we all got this one email from 23rd, and it's consistently about the overnight parking, and you have mentioned it. So, I just want to make sure that I'm super clear on this. So, when they're talking about the cars that are parked there as of right now, those don't have decals. They're just randomly parked there overnight.
They may or may not.
They may or may not.
Yeah, because even if somebody, today, the way the current ordinance is written, even if it's so vaguely, so poorly written, no offense to whoever wrote it, even if you have a decal, people with decals are parking vehicles down there and leaving them for days. So this is another effort to clear this up where, however y'all want to define it, it makes people move cars off the beach access. And one other thing, since you brought that up, Cookies, I think there may have been 3 or 4 emails from condo folks that had an issue with coming to City Hall and getting a temporary hang tag. Is that I saw an email where one of the emailing persons made a comment about, well, we've been checking on beach accesses and we just don't see a lot of cars parked at night. Well, some of that has to do with the whole impact of COVID, and I guess y'all figured out that the overwhelming majority of our Canadian guests are not here. There's some here, but so the crowd's way off. But they're really making my point for me is that in the nighttime hours, after a certain hour, we're saying 11 o'clock, if you have a need to, if you live over there and you have a need to park a car, there's some way we can accommodate you. We're just, under this ordinance, we're just not going to give out unlimited numbers of hang tags for whatever reason, and people keep them for a year. So that's.
So if you are in a condo, I'm just trying to be clear when I try to explain this to these, because they've written twice to all of us, okay?
Yeah,
And
it's let the record reflect this, 2 or 3 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they can get a decal because they live there year-round under the new ordinance.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to do anything with them year-round. Yeah, there's a provision in the.
Well, I mean, they're residents.
Well, yeah. If they own a condo, they don't even have to be a resident. If they own a condo, they can still come, if they own that condo, they can still come to City Hall and get a ticket.
Correct.
And that's covered under,
Okay.
see, where is it? I'll get back. It's covered under 62-35, and then you go way over to
I guess the reason I'm asking this, Greg, is because what I don't understand is, I'm not quite sure what the problem is, because if they get a decal, they can still park there.
They want to park overnight.
Yeah, no, overnight.
They can't
the
park.
way this is written is if this is adopted after 11 o'clock, if you have a decal or not, unless you have the special hang tag, you cannot park there.
But if they have the special hang tag, they can.
Right.
But that's for a limited amount of time.
Yeah, 3 days.
3 days, okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure I understand that correctly. All right, I get it now, all right.
And their fee is.
Commissioner Flagg, do you have anything that you want to ask at this time?
Just one question to Greg. The decals have always been handled in the past where you had to show your registration, license, and some type of proof of ownership when we went in to pick them up. Is that correct? Decals. That was the way.
I think the manager is pausing at your use of the word always.
Yeah,
Well, I'm saying that was the rule, not necessarily always followed.
Well, let me just, all I can, and I appreciate your question, and all I can speak to is period of time I've been here. For example, when I got here, they were issuing decals to golf carts that didn't have tags on there. Well, there's no provision in the code for that. The existing ordinance implies when you read it that decals are issued to residents, but the fact of the matter is, without playing the fingering game or gotcha game, is that basically you pretty easily could walk in and get a decal if you were here for some period of time. But that's I've kind of ratcheted up the rules. You know, for example, if somebody came in and said, "Well, I live in an apartment," they just automatically get how many do they need? They give it to them. You know, one of the things I did administratively is I put a requirement in before this ordinance was brought up that we either by like a letter or by a copy we want to know. I put a year minimum requirement that you got to be here a year to get a decal. So to answer your question, Commissioner Flagg, up until the last 3 or 4 years, they were given out pretty freely. Leave it that way.
So this decal is really a privilege for residents, and that's what we're going to try and restrict it to. So with the few parking spaces that are open, the residents would be able to use those parking details to park in the beach access. Is that correct?
Well, they obviously, if you do the math, if you're issuing,
Right, I know.
your odds are better. You know, this decal thing has been real educational